Uh, I may be facing some difficulties with video and the sound, so apologies in advance. First, please allow me to thank you for this honor to present a view of a small open economy on its contribution and possible contribution to this extremely important topic. Dear colleagues, despite the current situation, it is great to see that we are truly facing the challenges up ahead, and we are not allowing ourselves to be consumed with momentarily troubles and difficulties that this pandemic has wrought upon our economies and upon our nations. So first allow me to wish you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, or general good day, wherever you are. So when we talk about circularity, it will be very hard to add value after what Mr. Sikars has presented, but let me try. First, when we talk about circularity, indeed, we need to clearly define what is circularity. And we again propose to continue going forward with the definition set in SDG 12, ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns. And when we're talking about this, we can talk about the 3 Rs, the reuse, and recycle. When we're talking about developing and economies in transition, we need to first target the low-hanging fruit. And we believe that the first 2 things that we need to talk about is the reduce principle, which means that we need to be more productive. So how do we achieve productivity? Productivity could be achieved through absorption of innovation, because critical mass of knowledge and economic complexity that is needed to actually achieve reduction of material input has been accumulated in the developing world. There was a lot of talk about trying to provide sustainable finance, but there is also need to share the knowledge and the technology on how to actually implement principles of circular economy. And the recent report of the World Economic Forum has shown that actually the world is only 8.9% circular. So most of the world is still developing the solutions, and we can call ourselves all developing countries from the point of view of circular economy. So when we're talking about sharing innovation, it's first in innovation absorption. So we need to set up systems that will allow businesses in the developing and transitioning world to absorb the technologies and then partake in co-innovation to provide value added through solving the problems that the world is facing right now. Without that, without creating value added to the world, without benefiting through solving the problems, it will be very hard for developing countries to participate, and at least on the side of reduction. When we're talking about recycling and reuse, let me present the core issues that small open economy faces. We need critical mass of material consumption to actually be able to generate the value added when you're actually reusing and recycling production and products. In a small economy, it's very hard to generate this critical mass because a lot of material is being exported and a lot of material is being imported. And especially this problem shows when there is low economic complexity. So when the product space is not widely developed, the knowledge and abilities to transition material from one industry to another are extremely limited. So maybe from this point of view, what Mr. Sikar said about the agreements and making sure that circular economy is not limited to a certain country will be extremely important. Maybe we need to start thinking about regional and even global circularity. Because if we're talking about small country with 3 million people, developing economy and limited product space, it will be very hard to say how much resources would we need to redivert to circularity to make sure that we achieve the goals. And from this point of view, we believe that, again, the global community can play a leading role on making sure that we absorb the relevant knowledge, that the trade agreements are promoting circularity, and that the global, let's say, developing countries community, especially the small ones, can contribute. We need to enable countries like ourselves to contribute to circularity. And this contribution could be through research, it could be through exporting, let's say, concentrating on export of recycled materials, import of recycled materials, import of technologies, which is extremely important, but also finding the relevant technologies. Recent studies have shown that we mostly do have technologies that, the world at least, does have technologies that can enable circularity. It's all about the use. And if we are facing this use issue across the world, the problem is exacerbating in developing countries, which sometimes we don't know about the technologies and the possible venues of utilization of those. So I'll try to wrap up by saying the following. The pandemic still rages across the globe, and this cannot be underestimated. But we can already assess the damage caused, and we can already start to prepare to rebuild. And we need to arrange, we will be arriving into a world with damaged value chains, increased uncertainty in this crisis aftermath. And we need to take this into account when designing our policies. So the recovery must be swift and it must be global. And we make sure that no family across the globe is left behind in this recovery. To this extent, the speed of the recovery, especially in developing and transitioning countries, cannot be compromised. But does that really mean that green and more circular recovery necessarily means a slower one? If we ensure that knowledge is transferred, if we ensure that critical mass of trade across borders is reached to actually ensure regional circularity, we can arrive at a negative answer to this question. No, we don't need to compromise growth to achieve circularity. And this upcoming recovery is an opportunity for us all to tackle the most prominent challenges lying in front of us, because again, we will need to rebuild value chains, and this rebuilding can be based on the principles of circularity. And we can produce a swift and circular and sustainable recovery through a series of technological breakthroughs, which will most probably come from the developed world, and innovation absorption, which, if enabled, developing world can do. And finally, if we absorb the innovation, we can start contributing. So it has been revealed in a number of research papers that the developing world has the capacity to innovate, but it lacks the ability to direct finance towards relevant issues, the ability to control economic complexities, the ability to provide and clearly identify the challenges. If we address this ability through technical support, through, let's say, sorry for this very direct statement, putting the money on the table for businesses and for minds to follow. So basically, if you know that there is resources allocated to this, people will start to generate ideas, because by creating value, they will improve their own well-being, and they will start thinking and they will start working. We need to think about how do we motivate people to start providing solutions to the world. And to this extent, I think it has already been mentioned, but we cannot understate the importance of blended finance for circular economy projects, especially in developing and emerging economies. The policy frameworks, and to this extent, the research behind these policy frameworks is extremely important. And finally, we have been the public-private partnership contracts, which have been surging across the world recently, need to be utilized. Those partnerships have been growing, and the field will still have a lot of potential for innovation. We need to understand how do we use the PPP frameworks to enable the circular economy, because again, circular economy cannot be achieved only through private or only through public means. We need partnership. We don't need dialogue. Dialogue is the time for dialogue has passed. We need partnerships where the private sector is utilizing its access to finance and access to knowledge, and the public sector is basically transferring the increase in welfare and public benefits into direct profitability for the private sector. Dear colleagues, I will try not to take too much of your time. This was a general, let's say, review of our vision on circular economy and how developing countries could benefit and participate. And again, I would like to reiterate our core, let's say, points. It is trying to think about regional circularity, trade circularity, and trying to use cross-border, even public-private partnerships to utilize possibilities of the private sector and public sector, especially in the developing countries. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. And it will be very interesting to hear your opinions on this.